welcome you all to this roundtable, national roundtable on the CARICOM Commission Report on marijuana, originally published in 2018. The reason for this is very simple. We, as part of the non-state actors and the Conference of Churches of Grenada, recognize that groups such as ours have a responsibility to take part in the shaping of public opinion. And when the government called indirectly some weeks ago for discussions on these matters, we saw it as an excellent opportunity to try to push things forward. Because on such an important matter as this, every voice must be heard and every viewpoint respected, even as we seek to determine what is in the best interest of all Grenada. And now I want to introduce to you the chairman of the Conference of Churches Grenada, Reverend Silbert Prescott.
We are going to be looking at the economic considerations. My task is simply to introduce our moderator for this evening, Mr. Lester Arndal.
Welcome, my audience, and to those who are with us via Zoom. A distinguished group of panelists will be presenting on the economic considerations in this Interstate Actors Panel discourse on marijuana. I'd like to introduce my panelists. Firstly is Dr. Stephen Fletcher, followed by Mr. Kennedy Roberts, and followed by Dr. Patrick Antoine. Now, my first presenter would be Dr. Fletcher.
Thank you very much, Mr. Handel, and good afternoon to everyone here. Let me thank the organizers for inviting me to be here and to share my thoughts on this very important issue that is based again in our agricultural, the nature of our agricultural society and influence our overall national development. My topic is on economic and institutional considerations for the cultivation and production marketing of high-value marijuana, cannabis, and its byproducts. The subtitle is Ganja Farmer and Ganjanomics. Yeah, Queen Hatterton, right? I am studying on the report that we have been discussing, which is the CARICOM report, and in particular, I will like to make reference to two relevant paragraphs of that report. It says that some participants, including young persons, express their desire to enter into this new market economy. No longer will our most potentially productive youth be criminalized and jailed for their involvement in a niche market that was criminalized by historic accident. I'm not sure about the last two words, historic accident. That's one part of the report that I probably need clarification on. It was probably more deliberate than an accident. So the report actually raises the issue for our purposes of the tensions that are likely to arise between the small local farmers and the entry of the larger farmers, including foreign investors and foreign companies. This is a real issue that exists and with other sectors of our national economy, and no doubt marijuana will not be the exception to this kind of involvement. So the report, among other things, in its main rational aspect, the main aspect, point F, called for greater awareness of the economic potential of cannabis, marijuana, and increasing opportunities for international and local business. Certainly, this is important for us to do this. It's important for us to look at it within the context of what are the economic and business challenges that would arise once actions have been taken to provide the legal space and the legal infrastructure for the development of businesses. In my humble opinion, I want to put on the table at this outset that any move to develop any product, whether by decriminalization or we may have to move to legalization, it has to benefit the small man. It has to benefit the small farmers and the persons who have borne the main point of prosecution during the criminalization phase of this product. It's an opportunity for us to breathe. It's an opportunity to get the feet off the necks and allow us to breathe. And we must not lose this opportunity by not coming together as small farmers and as small business people to protect that part that we have fought for. And I'm putting we in the sense that as small farmers. I'm paralleling this situation with nutmeg farmers and cocoa farmers, in which case that you had to form associations of nutmeg and cocoa producers so that the small farmer that can only sell 10 pounds of nutmeg or 50 pounds of nutmeg benefited from a price perspective in the same way that a large estate owner that is delivering 5,000 pounds of nutmegs per annum could benefit. The report, in fact, in order to address this issue, proposes three models: decriminalization, full legalization, full legalization of marijuana for sale and use with state control. The third model is full legalization with within a competitive market frame. I wish to add one part to this, which is to go for legalization, but with a regulated market. It has to be regulated. It cannot be open and free to all because of the downside and the negative consequences that we have heard so far this morning. So, in proposing this option, I am really looking at what, although their history are different, which is cocoa and nutmeg, they did not acquire any legal status. They did not have to deal with negative consequences at the same level as marijuana or as ganja, but it provides from an institutional point of view. Mark my word, from an institutional point of view, we can learn some lessons of how we can develop a business organization, a business association that seeks to protect the small man and allow the small man to benefit from an enterprise in which is, as far as we are concerned, and as estimates shown, is a multi-billion-dollar business soon to reach the trillion-dollar mark. So why am I saying this? Let's look at some market considerations. The global market is huge. In the United States, for example, it is estimated to be reaching overall $9 billion, US $9 billion. In Canada, the estimate is 2.8 billion. Yeah? And that it is expected to grow overall to about 9.2 billion in 2025. However, there are some challenges that come with the business component or developing a business model that will adequately address the economic returns and the economic gains from this crop. And the challenges really speaks to what is happening with the banking sector. So I'll pivot to give some indications of what's happening in the banking sector. So for example, in California, despite the fact that there is a legal opening here, there is a legal market, a legal infrastructure for its operations, you find that over 70%, it is estimated over 70% of ganja business is unbanked. Yes, it doesn't go through the banking system. That is a challenge. And I'm going to tie it on with some comments later on. Canada has, of course, emerged as a hub. In our region, for example, Jamaica is at the point now where it is exporting ganja oil to Canada. This was possible because the Bank of Montreal, it is reported, can be termed one of the banks that basically facilitates banking transactions by ganja farmers. The challenge that we have, though, in our parts of the world, where we're under the influence and the direction and policing of the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, and the Caribbean brother of that, the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, what are the options, what are the possibilities that exist if we are to turn this into a real business model? So this is not just about justice from the law and the legal consequences. The discussion is fundamentally about what is the economics of it. How do we benefit economically from a crop that has gained worldwide market acceptance in an ever-growing market? How do we position ourselves as small island states, as Caribbean states that had suffered the daunting and the full-scale impact of criminalization of this drug? How do we now position ourselves to be beneficiaries? Beneficiaries in an economic sense. Beneficiaries that will allow us to have some economic independence and benefit from a crop that we were once prosecuted for. So there has been endless estimates, again, that showed about the market potential and the market possibility. I want to point out here, and I want to quote the Euromonitor, that has identified some key markets, key growing markets for the TCB oil in particular. In Germany, for example, the market in Germany is expected, and it is the largest, by the way, and it is expected to reach Euro $5.8 billion. In the UK, 2.8 billion pounds, it is estimated to be. In Canada, the oil sales about 153 million Canadian dollars, and that is going. Australia, interestingly, a very sizable market, a very buoyant market. The estimate is that by 2025, it will be $2.3 billion. So the export market potential is there for this crop. However, in looking at the economics of ganja, we must not be overexcited about the potential that it holds. We have to be sane and reasonable from a trade perspective. Like all other agricultural products that we export, marijuana will form part of that, subjected to the rigors of international trading rules and regulations. So even if we were to legalize it domestically, we still have to face the challenges that all export crops face on the international market. What are some of those challenges? The challenges are no different from banana, cocoa, nutmeg. So we have issues of production and productivity, economies of scale, financing, right? These are some of the challenges, and more so, entry barriers in those markets that we wish to enter. Those markets that I've just mentioned, the UK, Australia, Canada, the United States, they are entry barriers. So what does that say for us? We must consider, therefore, our entry into this market not as raw commodity exporters. We have to go up the value chain. So my sub-theme for this aspect to it asks the question, how can we move up the value chain and create clusters. So it's going up the value chain, and creating clusters within that industry that speaks to efficiencies and economic gains. It speaks about not remaining at the bottom of the table as raw commodity exporters, but to become value chain exporters. May I hasten to add here that, like the nutmeg oil, ganja oil is one part of the basic processes that are taking place at the primary level. To get to the real high end of the value, you still have to go a little bit further. At the moment, the oil is generating significant revenues, but we have to look beyond the oil, especially in the context, friends, that we are coming from behind the curve. The question is, how can we differentiate our products to make it an appetizing product in the global marketplace? It cannot just be another oil. How can we build unique characteristics into our product? How can we get involved in branding that will give us that differentiator in the international market and make our product an appetizing product, in the same way as we have done with nutmeg and cocoa? We have experience that we can leverage. We can learn from some of those experiences, and we can apply it to this new scheme. So our fundamental objectives, in my view, which is based on sense making, is to ensure that we provide a secure and stable income for persons along the value chain in the ganja business. And this is where the tire will hit the road. What kind of model eventually that will be allowed to be formed, notwithstanding the legal framework? Because the legal framework can exist, but your business model could end up failing because it is not an efficient and effective model. All of us in this room here remembers very much what happened with bananas. The market for bananas existed for us. The rules had changed, but the market existed. The problem is that we could not have met the new conditions of entry into the banana market in Europe, and therefore we had to get out of that crop. So we have to, as we think of the future of the ganja planter, we have to think of the ganjanomics that comes along with it, to use the word of a gentleman from Jamaica, who I borrowed this phrase from Dr. Malcolm, that speaks to the issue of ganja, right? So in ending, and I've just been prompted here, thanks very much, because I also have to leave. I also want to make the following points, reiterate what I said earlier on, that there is a financial component to any business model. The ability of Grenada and the Caribbean to inject itself into the global value chain in the ganja business is fraught with difficulties and problems. The key among them is the FATF rules and regulations, which addresses issues of money laundering and the fight against terrorism. It involves issues of compliance. It involves issue of knowing your customers, the KYC rules and regulations. So the global legal landscape still remains challenging for us, even if domestically we may wish to go the full route of legalization. So probably at the end of the day, we may wish to have to consider, as radical as this might be, in order for this business model to work and to be effective, we may have to establish a ganja bank. Thank you very much.
My next presenter is Mr. Kennedy Roberts.
As was indicated, I am here in my personal capacity because I was advised that this is a forum that is non-partisan, but I'm here in the capacity as a health economist who has been at St. George's University for 20 plus years and has been discussing this issue for some time. In the presentation, I will look at a bit of what the CARICOM Commission report said, look at some of the global directions in which things are going, make some comments on the impact on the supply and demand for marijuana, but highlighting what is considered the social cost, the cost to society, looking at some of the economic impact, and conclude. What I want to highlight from the CARICOM report, the CARICOM report is very detailed. And I've been saying for months and years since this report has come out that it is important for the government to digest the content of the report because it gives so much detail that when I hear the cry for more research and more research, I ask the question, did you read the CARICOM report? And invariably, that report is able to clarify a lot of the confusion that people has in it. So it has looked at the legal, the medical, the social, the economic context of marijuana. So I think we have a lot of data from which we can work. The economics, the report also did an economic study for the Commission. So in addition to the CARICOM report, there are some other reports that were done, and there was a specific economic study that was done, and it made reference, and Dr. Fletcher made reference to the three proposals, decriminalization or legalization with state control or legalization with the market framework. What the report stresses and has been seen from other countries is that this is a very lucrative industry. What we have to also look at is that when we look at the costs and the benefits of marijuana, we have to look at it from different ways. And the report goes into several of the areas. They looked at the averted costs of lost wages from arrest. When you arrest somebody for marijuana and they have to go through the legal system, they're not in a position to work. If they're incarcerated, that is production that the country is losing. The definition of the indicator we use of gross domestic product is the total value of all goods and services produced in the country. So when you have persons being locked up for marijuana, you're really averting the cost of lost wages. You're really losing productivity in your economy. When you think of the costs involved by the police in incarcerating and hunting down people and terrorizing people for marijuana, this is a cost that has dollar value to it. And those resources could be spent on other aspects of policing that can have a much more beneficial aspect to the country. When you think of what is happening in the prison system, the financial costs alone, we're not even going into the mental stresses that we cannot easily put a dollar value to. And over the years, you've had so many people being locked up and the government, the state financing the costs of them living in prisons. That again can be averted. But also, the report recognizes that once marijuana is decriminalized or legalized, it will set the basis for the government to earn revenue. So instead of spending, they will be earning revenue as a whole. They also indicated in the report that we have to acknowledge that there might be some negative effects with persons who already have health problems, who have genetic problems with their mental health and other health problems, that they can have some negative consequences as a result of use of marijuana. So the cost of treatment has to be factored into the equation. Dr. Amlaru Marshall made reference to the whole issue of accidents, vehicular accidents as a result of driving. This has to be studied more, but we also have to factor in that there might be some costs associated with that. So the Commission, the economic study concluded that, and it says that savings and additional revenue may be significant depending on the model of liberalization used. And they're saying that in the case of Model 1, which is the decriminalization, additional costs tend to be the lowest And so the benefits in terms of savings and additional revenue is also going to be low. But to get the highest benefits alongside with the highest costs, you have to look at model 2 or 3 of legalization across the board. This, what I just went through, is what the report basically said about the decriminalization of ganja. What I will do is go into what is happening at the global level, and reference has already been made to the UN Commission on Narcotics Drug. The UN Commission on Narcotics Drug, the CND, in December last year, removed cannabis from the Schedule 4 of the 1961 Single Convention on Narcotics Drugs. This is one of the most significant milestones that we have to acknowledge, because with the UN now declassifying marijuana as it used to, it now opens the door for governments to take the necessary action, because the Narcotics Commission on Narcotics Drugs have basically indicated that what has been said for all these years cannot be validated, and countries, in my opinion, now has the ability to move forward with the decriminalization issue. Because we're looking at the economics of it, looking at the supply side, we have to acknowledge that when we talk about the supply, it means that how much is available to the market. The price, and this is economics for any product, the price entails the production costs, and in marijuana case, the seeds, the other material, the wages you pay for the thing, the land, whether you rent it or own it, there's a value you have to factor in. Then there's the selling cost, the transportation, the business place that you located, the wages and so. However, while it is easy to calculate these costs, what is more difficult to calculate is the indirect costs, the risk of getting arrested, prosecuted, the risk of having to go in a location where, because of the illegal nature of marijuana, it could be exposing yourself to violence and other risk. These sort of issues will not be factored in if the issue is changed and it is decriminalized. Prices will be reduced if that indirect cost due to the legal nature is done. And of course, the legalization would generate taxes, and the structure has to put mechanisms to control the production and distribution. However, when we look at the demand side, there is also a cost with regards to the demand, because a person who is purchasing marijuana not only have to pay that monetary cost, but they also have to look at the non-monetary costs and the psychological costs of being arrested again. So from the supply side, the person who's selling it have to worry about being arrested, and when you go in and buy it on the demand side, you still have to be worrying about being arrested. And that psychological cost, that indirect cost, you can't put a dollar value to it, but it is significant when you see the end result that a person is actually arrested and charged and jailed for it. What we have to also look at then is the cost to society, what they call the social costs. Things society has to pay for outside of the transaction costs. So outside of that transaction cost, I made reference to the law enforcement costs. But then when a person is arrested, the legal costs, the cost of the legal system. When we think of the negative behaviors in families and communities, Dr. Prabhakar made reference to patients coming and commenting about the family situation. But the family situation and the community can also be looked at from the other angle, the social costs. And I can't help but think of Chris and Trevor Regis. Chris was shot because of smoking a spliff. And when his father got upset, had his mental issues, I guess, to stab police, he was shot. And that cost to that family, can we put a dollar value to it? These are some of the things that we have to think about locally that affects us in terms of dealing with marijuana. But we also have to acknowledge that there's some medical costs and the long-term impact on youth. Over and over, the studies are saying that when your brain is developing and up to the age of 18, some say 21, there can be some negative consequences. So we have to factor that in, because we have to acknowledge that there are a lot of people out there who have the negative perceptions, and this is one of the greatest negatives about what is being pushed out there, the impact on children. So we have to balance it and make sure that we put things in place, not just for them not to go into smoking marijuana, but put things in place for them to be involved in sports and culture and drama and music and other things in the school system that would divert them from being attracted to marijuana. So it has to be a package of services that needs to be considered, not just decriminalizing, but what you're going to put in place to address the youth. When we look at some of the economic implications, the cost of enforcement was mentioned. Reference was made that you cannot bank monies, proceeds from marijuana because of the illegal nature, so they consider that money laundering. And when you look at the loss in foreign exchange in Grenada, now I sat down with a couple of brethren and we had a rough calculation as to how much foreign exchange leave Grenada on an annual basis because of marijuana. And he said, you know something, we have 60,000 adults in Grenada, and it is felt that at least 10,000 Grenadians smoke marijuana on a regular basis. But there's another 10, 20,000 that will smoke periodically. But if you just use the 10,000 people who smoke, and you say on average, and we know there are different grades and different prices, but they say on average, if you spend $200 a month, and for some people that is a little high grade, and for other people that is a couple ounces a decent thing. If you calculate that $200 a month by 12 months, that's $2,400 a year. By 10,000 people, that's $20 million plus dollars. And you say this is the lower end. So really and truly, Grenada can be saving a lot in foreign exchange by producing our own. In conclusion, I want to just deal with touch on a few things that research shows that the properties and impact of marijuana use is compared with alcohol and tobacco. So we can put the similar laws in place that we have for alcohol and tobacco. You can't sell to minors, you can't smoke in public places, and put things in place with regards to that. Everybody is acknowledging the medical importance of marijuana, but what is also very true is that low-income people in poverty tend to smoke more, and they're the ones who tend to be incarcerated more. So the lower income people in our society is bearing a greater burden as a result of the illegal nature of marijuana. But I also believe it is appropriate to remove the criminal records of persons who've been considered offenders in the past. We have to also recognize the historical oppression of users. And in Antigua, the government apologized to Rastafari for the historical prosecution. And I think acknowledging now that marijuana is not as bad as it used to be is an indicator that we should step up and acknowledge that there was a lot of injustice done. We have to put measures in place to protect the children, as I said, but I believe the greatest economic impact for us, we have to, in a structured way, link the marijuana with our tourism industry. When tourists come to Grenada, I don't think we need the 1,000-room high-rise facilities, because I think we can cater for a tourism market that want to come in the community and sit by the river and cook a oil down and go out and fish and catch some marlin outside there and smoke some good little herb, and they know it is done in a legal way, and they're coming back every year as tourists. And I think the tourism industry has to be looked at in that. The linkage with agriculture. It is said that when you're planting ganja and you're doing it legally, you're planting more food. You're planting yam and dashing, and you're out in the field, and you know you could do it in a legal way. Even though it was illegal in St. Vincent producing more food than any other island in the region, and watch their size. We also have to involve the traditional farmers. So we have to acknowledge, yes, it's illegal, people hide in the bush and they plant it all about, but you have to acknowledge that they're real, and you have to involve them in one way or the other. But the education program, the consultation is critical for us to move. And I believe the time is now to pass that legislation to decriminalize it and work towards full legalization. But we need serious political will. We do not need a situation where we're bamboos and it being used as a political tool for a vote. We see that as something that is beneficial to Grenada, whether you're supporting one party or the other. And I believe that the dialogue we're having today is one step in the right direction for us to move towards removing that stigma of marijuana and be proud to be producers of top quality ganja. Blessings.
At this time, we would try to connect with Dr. Antoine.
Thank you very much, comrade. And the joy is really mine to be joining with you on this issue, of which at the time I would have sat in many of the consultations at the CARICOM level as we sought as a community to review the study that you're looking at today and to, of course, make recommendations. And I had the privilege of being at the heads when the study was finally accepted. In that context, I want to thank all the organizations for this splendid event today, and of course for the way in which we've been able to link up in a seamless manner. And though I have not had the opportunity to follow all of it today, I think being well seized of the makings of this study, I'm located to make a couple of points which have emerged certainly from my work in the region since, and of course based on my knowledge base of what is in fact a very important topical issue at the CARICOM and international level. I want to say that having heard the discussions this morning, there is a hybrid I want to put to the meeting, which I think is going to be very important for us to recognize, and that is a hybrid that St. Vincent has been following. This is where we're talking about depenalization. Depenalization is where the act above certain quantities, for instance, that are not offenses, those continue to be, as it were, acts that the law recognizes is not in keeping with that which they want to facilitate. I'm using my words very broadly. And so rather than incarcerating quote unquote offenders above these critical limits, what they do is that instead they issue tickets. So there is no arrest and charge and hence no criminal record. And I think that is certainly an important component of what we want to be discussing. I want to make the point, though, that when we're discussing the economics of this, it's important to understand that depending on the model that you want to pursue, the issue of how you classify this, whether you in fact move to total decriminalization, whether you move to recreational use, will have implications for the model that you develop. So in the case of Jamaica, for instance, they've moved perhaps furthest along the decriminalization spectrum. In the case of St. Vincent, they have wisely adopted an approach of depenalization. And of course, in the model that we've seen unfold there, which I will speak about, there are a number of other interesting lessons for us. And I think that's the first important distinction, because there are also hybrids along the way that helps us to achieve this outcome of social justice, which of course removes the discriminatory and oppressive nature of the laws that now exist that we ought to explore as well. I want to say, colleagues, that my dear friend Ken Roberts made reference to the International Convention, which of course declassified marijuana. And I think while it's a symbolic step, I want to make the point that in the context of what we're discussing today on the economic impact, it doesn't really take us to where we need to go as small states in terms of our linking to the international market. There are a couple of points I want to leave with you, and the first one is that really when you look at the way in which the marijuana issue has evolved, what you have is a number of small states, largely with some reputation behind the industry, either because they have produced for a long time or because it is believed that they have strains of marijuana that are in high demand. There are a couple of countries in the Caribbean and Latin America where that is true. And then you have a number of countries, Canada, North America, in the United States of America, and then you have Europe, that are the big markets. There's some other emerging markets still, but what you have is really large countries with large resources and large land masses with large technology bases, and you have small countries with small land masses where the technology is not as developed and where the capital availability is not as high. These fundamentals have not changed even for marijuana. And so I want to make the following sobering comments. I believe that, as the past president of the United States would have said, that the best option for small countries wanting to pursue, this is Barack Obama, wanting to pursue development in the marijuana space is really not to think about connecting to large global markets. Because as he put it then, once you do that, you're going to be opening the door to big pharma. And I heard a colleague speak about that earlier. But he spoke about that essentially a small pharma type niche industry where people have to visit to enjoy and to heal and to recreate and so on from what the small states are able to produce. And in that regard, I wanted to say that the cross-border trade of marijuana is still a challenge for small states. And that challenge is not going to go anywhere soon. The challenge really is how do we move, even as we've seen the progression, what are still regarded as illicit drugs into a market that is no longer illicit, such as in Canada and the United States, in some states, and in Europe. But how do we actually cross those borders is a challenge. And that challenge, of course, as you know, in the United States at federal level, marijuana is still in fact prohibited and is not easily tradable across the border, although there is some trade between Canada and the United States. But it's not the case, for instance, in Europe and in many of the countries that we've been talking about. And so my third point is that marijuana will not be the silver bullet that many people have held it up to be in terms of trade, cross-border trade, and getting rich quick. The second point is that what we're doing is that we are engaged with a process where we're coming in late, both as a country and as a region. The third critical point I want to make is that what we're discussing today, even with the best will in the world, will entail a lapse between the consultation process, the legislative process, and then when we engage the opportunity. And what we've seen with the countries that have moved the quickest is that that process takes about 3 years. In the case of Jamaica, it took 5. So we're not talking about something that's going to be a quick fix in terms of economic growth. We're talking about something that we're going to have to work at, even if we're diligent, that will take us 3 years or so before we start seeing the performance. The fourth factor, I had the opportunity of speaking at CANEX in Jamaica about 3 years ago. They invited me as a guest speaker to talk about the economic prospects. And at the time, I made the point that I was very cautious about making the forecast that we would see big growth and big developments from marijuana, notwithstanding the excitement around it. I have to tell you this. On checking ahead of this consultation, the colleagues in Jamaica who work in the industry, my colleagues in CANEX and others, are making the point that but for a small shipment to Canada, the performance from Jamaica has been very disappointing to many. I will make another point about the performance, but I want to say the second thing. Ahead of this consultation, I spoke with my colleagues in St. Vincent. St. Vincent, despite the funding that they've put in, and they raised it wisely, is yet to see a dollar come from the new wave of investments coming from the legislation put in place. In short, a lot of what's been taking place is really premised on the old model, and they are in fact getting rid of that. But on the new wave of investments with new money coming into the industry, they have not earned $1 yet. And I think I want to put that there because it's sobering. So colleagues, why would one want to invest in marijuana at this time? And I'm taking this line because I heard Ken's presentation. There's no need for me to get into the social cost. I think Brother Roberts did an excellent job on that. I'm talking about the practical touchy-feely things, where you have people essentially with bated breath, feeling that they're going to do what was done in Jamaica and then in St. Vincent in anticipation that somehow this opportunity is going to lead to easy wins. What we've seen, and I think I heard from one of my research assistants that Mr. Fletcher raised the point about investment. Let's look at what the investment environment has essentially meant for the countries that have undertaken these opportunities based on legislation. That will give us a good pattern to see what our likely economic impact will be. And you've had essentially three types of investments, and the ones that come into perhaps the most prominence would have been the private equity funds and the publicly traded companies. And I have to tell you that I'm happy to say to you that those have not worked out well. What has happened is that people have used St. Vincent and Jamaica and Colombia and other places to pump what we call their stocks and bonds. And as soon as they've pumped them, what they've done is that they've essentially sold off at a higher price. So what we call in economics is pump and dump. They've pumped the stocks and sold them off. They have gotten the benefits, but the countries have not been much better off in terms of investments in the sector. In the case of St. Vincent, they engaged 150 firms as investors. They ended up with 8 firms. And of 8 firms, those 8 firms, they probably have 3 serious ones. And where the 3 serious firms have come from, largely from in the region, not from the international markets where people have come in with big stocks and bonds behind it and big promises. And there's an interesting thing that we also need to look at outside of the investment situation. But perhaps I should highlight that what's worked best in investment is small farmers, small capital, and joint ventures. Small capital, small farmers, joint ventures. That's where we've seen most of the performance take place. And of course, even in St. Vincent and in Jamaica, the interesting dynamic now is that the models that's working best is not big capital. It's small farmers, small capital, joint ventures. And the other thing that appears to hold some prospects, let me just go over that quickly, would be loan capital coming from doctors and medical schools and others. But we've not seen the type of performance coming from those either in Jamaica or in St. Vincent. What we've seen is that those universities and funds like that are loan funds, have done better and are doing better in markets in North America and in Europe. I wanted to say that so you know what model's working best for us. The other point I want to make very quickly is that research. We believed for some time that we needed to do more research. I want to tell you this. A lot of the research is done. We believed, for instance, that if we were to do more research on marijuana in St. Vincent, it could somehow act as a fillip, as a driver of competitiveness. This is the news for you today. The research was done by the multinational companies on St. Vincent years ago. They have the seeds. And what's happened, which is actually a counter tendency, is that the producers in St. Vincent and Jamaica are now importing these very hybrid seeds, right, and high performance seeds from these companies in the United States, which is why I think I agree with the colleague before, when she warned about being cautious with the seed companies and big pharma because they can switch the lights off. So I wanted to make that point because I think research is important, but it's not important in the seeds. It's important in the byproducts. It's important in infusion. It's important in niche products. And of course, I will mention one more industry where it's important, and that is what I call psychedelics. There is an industry coming from marijuana from countries that have suffered from this fatigue of being promised that marijuana could in fact lead to substantial better developments. And I'm not talking about democratizing wealth on the ground for small farmers. I'm talking about the big capital. And I'm raising big capital because increasingly there's been these tendencies for big capital to look at markets like ours because they can do some things in our markets that they can't do in the large countries from whence they've come. Big capital has not worked well. But what we've seen is that, for instance, this market for psychedelics is now a market that people are turning to, and they're turning to it as part of the health and wellness and development of niche products. And that is where I think we're going to get a lot of the benefit. But colleagues, To do that, it means that we have to do some things we have not done well before. Because what they're talking about is derivatives of products that we have. Things like moringa. As I heard the colleague mention it before, she's absolutely right. The next CANEX is going to be on psychedelics. She's talking about the things like some of the byproducts coming from soursop and things that we actually make already. That's where the research has to come. So colleagues, I want to talk about licensing, because who gets the license is also going to impact on how well we do. In the case of Jamaica, the license was given largely to large entities. And when I say that, it is to simplify the fact that the pricing points ruled out small farmers. In the case of St. Vincent, what they did is that they grandfathered small farmers, and they used in St. Vincent a particularly interesting amnesty clause, which allowed the small farm production on the ground of marijuana to be turned into oil, so that immediately small farmers didn't have a gap in income, but they could in fact continue to produce and trade. And in St. Vincent, they did something that's unique. They also grandfathered these small producers and gave them a traditional license. I'm suggesting that what we do in terms of the structure is also going to have an impact on the benefits, who gets the license, and what that license is to do. In Jamaica, they segregated the license into 5 or 6 tiers. In St. Vincent, they recognized that it was better for the small farmer and for the country if the license was vertically integrated, so that when you get a license, you could produce, you could manufacture, you could distribute, and then you could dispense at the retail level. In the case of Jamaica, every license was different. And so what's happened in Jamaica is that rather than empowering a lot of the small farmers were essentially duped into believing that this new regime would bring tremendous benefits. Many of them invested all they had. And I have to tell you, based on my own discussions and based on my own knowledge of a number of stories, ended up worse off than they were before. I warn again that all of these are things we need to look at in making sure that the economic benefits come. So let me just say the following. What has emerged from the marijuana industry recently in a number of developing countries is actually training specialist workers to work in cannabis and marijuana in North American markets. This pattern, many believe, will also arise in some European markets. In short, what you're doing in St. Vincent, because you realize that you're not getting the benefits. Let me repeat, you're not getting the benefits from the new wave of investments that's coming. But you've done a lot to make the thing legal and to decriminalize by using this depenalization process. A lot of those who would have suffered for having 2 spliffs above the legal limit, for instance. You've done that. But the economic boon that you expected wasn't there. What they've done is that they're now training people from St. Vincent and training people from other countries to work, for instance, in the marijuana industry, because marijuana needs specialist skills. So in the case of St. Vincent and some of the other countries, I have some numbers. People are signing 2-year contracts for $180,000 or 90,000 EC a year. And they're being trained and certified. And increasingly, that's now becoming one of the flows that's also contributing to what's happening in the industry. Let me also say that youth, you want to be able to do this so that the youth population participates. So how we structure the license and the industry must be such that it allows the innovation and the excitement of youth to pour and to flow into it. And that's going to be important. That was done in St. Vincent. Outside of that, it was done in Jamaica, but it was not done well. So colleagues, I want to say the following. As we look forward to the future, I want to be clear. Marijuana has become a commodity. Marijuana is no longer this wonder thing that will take us out of poverty, but marijuana is in fact one of those opportunities if we work well, if we do the research, if we put the regulatory body in place. And that's the other point I want to talk on before I wrap up. Because you have to put a regulatory body in place, and then you have to have all of the facilities for testing and tracing. If we do that well, if we do it better than we've done agriculture, better than we've done nutmeg, better than we've done a number of the other things that we know how to do well, if we do that better, then our country and our small farmers will definitely become better off. If we don't put the pieces in place, colleagues, it is not going to be any different outside of what we will achieve in terms of social justice. No different from the economic perspective that we've seen come from a lot of what we have in fact produced before. And I wanted to just say very, very bluntly, because I know there is a lot of anxiety, a lot of expectation, that this calls for a lot of focus. This consultation is important. We need to work more on making sure that the structure, as we put it in place, as we move beyond the issue of how we create social justice by decriminalizing 2 or 3 spliffs, for instance. But to create this as an economic sector, we need to put a lot of thinking into it. The markets of Canada is going to be flat. Jamaica has had one very small export to Canada. The United States will be flat because the political climate will not allow them to remove marijuana from the list of federal substances that cannot be traded across cross-border lines. The European countries are themselves expanding production, and increasingly they want to get raw materials so they can produce the value-added products and export it back to us. And whether we like it or not, there are a lot of those products from Europe in our own markets in CARICOM that are produced from marijuana, although we in our countries, many of us have not yet legalized it. So colleagues, it's an excellent opportunity for the small farming community. It must be embraced properly. And I'm sorry if I have poured some reality on some of this, but I have lived long enough to see great ideas with great prospects not be embraced properly for us to lose the moment. And we ought not to cause this one to follow the same trajectory that many others have followed. So this is where I want to wrap up in saying to you that we need to embrace this with a dose of reality. And of course, Ralph Gonzalez was the one who said, I believe you, I may be quoting him improperly, when he said that there is no pot of gold at the end of the marijuana rainbow. And I want to end on that note by saying, colleagues, that excellent opportunity, hard work, research, byproducts, psychedelic, good agriculture, let's embrace it, let them come to our markets, do what we have to do, but we need to be very, very cautious about how we deal with this. And finally, corresponding banking, we've said I sat on the working group. The world is not going to be open anytime soon to inflows coming in from marijuana into the banking sector. That's one of Jamaica's biggest challenges now. St. Vincent is starting to face that challenge, and they're now starting to gear up for it because many of the banks cannot take the proceeds of marijuana. In Jamaica, they've gotten away because there's a large informal sector. And so you can essentially bring your money in from several things from informal trade, and no one can track it directly. We need, as a small country that's really fragile in terms of our banking commitments, to look at that as part of the mix. And I think Ken and also my dear brother Stephen Fletcher would have mentioned that. I endorse that too. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
The floor is now open to take questions, both from the audience present and those who are listening to us online.
Mr. Chair, if I may just make an intervention. So in my rush state, there were some additional statements which I wanted to make, but I want to add to my friend Patrick Antoine regarding the issue of the exuberance with which we might be looking forward to this this opening up this market as being a panacea for probably solving some of our economic problems. It's not really going to be that. I laid the basis by indicating, like nutmeg, cocoa, bananas, this will face some of the very same challenges that these previous commodities have faced. But let me add to this. In my research on this, my continuing research on this matter, the markets are stabilizing and to some degree declining, the global markets. In fact, in Canada, which is quite a surprise because Canada has been one of the early movers, as we call them, and hub for the consumption of the ganja and its byproducts. Last year, the market declined by 8%. There's been an 8% decline in the market. So, and in, sorry. So we are going to see some amount of that fallout taking place. And like most new products that comes into the marketplace, there is a life cycle of introduction, growth, right, tapering off, and then some amount of decline. So we have to consistently be monitoring the marketplace, monitoring what is happening on the international scene, along with the issues that have been raised before, the entry issues, the technical and non-technical barriers that you'll have to address in dealing with trade. So that brings us to the question as to what extent really there is a domestic market for the kind of value processing, the kind of value products that we may wish to enter into. I do not wish to offer a comment on this right now. It still needs to be monitored, it still needs to be studied, but the domestic market, in my view, will be very similar to that of what we face in any of our commodities right now, whether it's cocoa, nutmeg, bananas, and so on. There are real constraints within the domestic market. The challenge again for small island states is how do we interject ourselves into the global value chain, as we have been encouraged to do by the international organizations like the UN, EU, and so forth, because the domestic market may not offer the kind of dynamic returns that we expect on our investments. And hence my reason for focusing on small farmers, association types, with regulations as what exists for GCNE and cocoa. I just wanted to add that.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Fletcher.
For Dr. Fletcher, especially, listening to Dr. Antoine and yourself speak, listening to some of the other panelists up there this morning, it sounds like we're still only conversing about smoking cannabis. It sounds like our conversation is surrounding only the female plant. This is a disservice to the conversation we're supposed to be having. Cannabis is made up of two plants, a male and a female. If we continue to converse about this plant solely on the female basis, we will lose. Rightfully so. The market is huge, but it's controlled by a lot of people. We need to have a holistic approach towards legalizing cannabis in Grenada, not decriminalizing it. Decriminalizing, or what was the word that Dr. Antoine used? Depenalizing. Both of those things are stepping stones, which if we end up at is great. However, listening to Dr. Antoine's presentation, especially at the ending, his conclusion, for us to craft and make the best thing for Grenada, which will take in all the account of Grenadian people, that when it's done, we won't be used, abused by anybody, but even by our own selves. To be able to do that, we can't, I think it's a disservice to the movement, to the process, by starting with decriminalization or depenalization. It sounds like gimmicks, when we really should be sitting down and having wholehearted, full-throated conversations about how do we legalize this particular plant in a way that best protects our people now and in the future, based on the history that brought us to this point. I think we're acting from still a fear perspective and making decisions based on fear that, for example, the markets are going to plateau and shrink. But most of those fears come from a smoke perspective, from a female plant perspective. We're not talking about textiles. We're not talking about pharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals. These are the things that will be able to help Grenada form that niche that we need to be able to be prosperous in this endeavor. To be able to do that, we need to legalize the plant. For whether it's research, development, or whatever, we cannot fully research a plant that is still quasi-illegal. Even though it's depenalized or decriminalized, it's still illegal. And I think framing it the way we have, with fear as its basis, will not allow most people in our country to break past that fear we ourselves have to break past that fear first so people can see that the people that are talking about this aren't afraid. There will be mistakes made. There have been mistakes made, and we need to be cognizant of that. One of the things that we need to, in terms of dealing with the youth, we need to set that under 21, no one should be consuming cannabis without a doctor's and parent consent. That way we take usage by children or minors quasi off the table. Yes, there will be people that do it if, as Brother Awadi said, we don't have actual enforcement. If we're not honest about our enforcement, then of course people will do what they want. But that's with anything else. We seem to be still at the point where we're making decisions based on fear instead of, as you said, Dr. Antoine, researching, understanding the pros and cons, and making a decision in spite of the fact that we're afraid of what may happen. Because we did the research to prevent or deal with whatever comes when it comes. I think we have an opportunity to craft a bill in Grenada that actually will be the talk of the world if we do it properly and when we do it properly. However, going into that process with a fear foundation will not allow us to get the best out of this process. We will still end up with the same old thing we had before because we started out with fear. So as I asked Dr. Awali earlier, is there a way, to Brother Antoine, is there a way you see, whether it's to converse differently or even in the law itself, to get us to start this process as we're started, but to start it more from a confident foundation than a fear foundation, where we're making decisions based on what negatives may happen instead of how positive things can be?
I acknowledge that the question relates to why shouldn't we be dealing with this issue in a much more positive framework as opposed to one focusing on the fears. I believe that historically the whole issue of marijuana was considered so negative that there's still a lot of people who are not comfortable to even talk about it. As a result, those persons who are presenting what you call the negative side of the argument tends to be louder because that's the voice we've been hearing for the longest while. I believe, though, that things are changing. The whole world is recognizing the benefits of marijuana. People are becoming more aware of the history of why this thing was decriminalized, was made a criminal, was criminalized. And as a result, I think we are at the stage now in Grenada where we're lagging behind. And I believe that it is important to do this in a phased way. And that's why I suggest, first of all, let's deal with the basic issues of not harassing people for small quantities. Let us go to the Parliament and pass a first draft if necessary. Because I believe if we go to talk about the whole entire package about export and quality and all these fancy things, it will take several years of discussion. But I think the discussion needs to be speeded up now, and this, in my opinion, is what we need to focus on now. What are the specific things we can put in legislation now to ensure that the mental stress associated with marijuana is removed first and foremost?
Yeah, thank you. I think you can hear me now. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we are hearing you.
Yes, I think the comrade raises two important questions, and I want to address them frontally. Brother Williams, rest assured that we have spent quite a bit of time in my little organization doing a lot of work on marijuana. In fact, I asked my research assistant to reach these products for you. I'm sorry you can't see it clearly. This is actually from Europe. This is actually a CBD night cream, right? This is another one which is cannabis oil. This is another one which is a cannabis body lotion. All of these were purchased here in Trinidad, right? So I wanted to tell you frontally what the answer to your question is. Is it hypocritical? Yes. Why is it hypocritical? Because if I were to have a regime where I spoke about legalization, the international banking community would turn off my lights tomorrow. So that is not from a position of fear. It's a position of what are the realities of small countries when you are essentially connected to an international finance system that you do not control. You think I can go to Europe or Czechoslovakia and pick up Jamaican body lotion with Jamaican CBD oil in it? Think again. How come I can get all of these products from Czechoslovakia and other countries off of any shelf in many places in the region? We live in an international trading and finance system that is as it always was, discriminatory and oppressive. So what we have to do in that context is that we have to learn to work between the spaces. And the spaces that we have to work in is to realize that the international laws only allow me to have regimes that admit to marijuana for either research or for medical use. And so where you want to get to, I could help you get to that by crafting legislation that talks about medical marijuana. And rather than people smoking indiscriminately, like some people believe is going to happen when this thing passes, to smoke this thing or to use it as a byproduct, because that's where I am. I'm saying that it's a commodity, and if we're not getting here, forget it. That's my thesis today. My thesis is that the value is in the value-added product. When I can mix this with coconut oil and other things and do some crazy formulations that people really want, that's the value of this. Because marijuana is a commodity that we can't compete with Colombia or Uruguay on, or Canada or Oregon. In Oregon, they lost $8 billion because they overproduced. We are only into value added. To get where you want to get to, we can write the legislation so that medicinal marijuana speaks to anyone wanting to use it who must go to a doctor to get a prescription. I want to grandfather my Rastafarian community by allowing the legislation to designate certain places that the Rastafarian community have held firm for many years. The tabernacles, the properties, the farms. I want to put that in the legislation so that it essentially becomes a place where for spiritual use you can go there and you're not deemed to be using the marijuana on the street. So I want to get where you want to get to, and my use now is to tell you that already in a lot of places people are actually producing marijuana cookies and marijuana this and exporting it, and people are actually playing with formulations, not just for edibles but for other things. So we can get there. Wonderful. I'm happy to beautiful. So we can get there together, but stepwise. We can get there stepwise, but we can't do it in one fell swoop. They will shut off all lights tomorrow, okay?
Hi, Dr. Antoine, I love you. My husband should have been here to hear you, as well as Mr. Roberts. Oh my gosh, bang on. My Rasta brethren out there, you know, Abraham, whose wife does homeopathic remedies and stuff, this is what we need to know. This is where we need to go. Hanshiel, Chalky, you guys out there, listen, this is where we need to go. You see the legislation from St. Vincent that Dr. Antoine is talking about, where you get to do everything by product. How many times we give the raw material to even agro-processors right here and get pennies on the dime, yeah? So this is about you being able to create your stuff for yourself. I know that I'm following on Facebook and Instagram. I see a girl doing OMI. I don't know who that is, but it's products out of coconut and cocoa butter and things of that nature. Debbie Mason, another person. Chocolate is one of these infusers, and I have to tell you that was not secret with me. Yeah, chocolate, because it's embedded inside of the cocoa butter and then made into chocolate, and it has a balance to it. I'm now hearing about it. I go to the farmer's market here in Illinois where it's legal, and they sell you salves for my arthritis. Salves. And these are homemade. These are people selling, just like you sell spice baskets in the market, which means you could be in that market as well. You don't wait on somebody to own you and then give them. You remember how much we were getting for coconut water in the juice place, the Canadian juice place? We don't want to be owned anymore. What Dr. Antoine is talking about, being free people in a free economy, owning ourselves, as well as Dr. Roberts, what he said is similar to Airbnbs. We already know we have the yachties, you know the block on Grandad's speech, you know those things are happening. But here it becomes legalized. Yeah, it's no longer, it's that tourism that comes down that you know comes for that all the time. These are hypocritical secrets we kept from each other and scorned men who did that. But we know those who are really prominent people in the society who are also doing it, but there was no scorn. That rust on your head brought a lot of problems. It did for my husband. But here, for the first time, we could be decent people doing a decent thing. Agro-processing is the way to go. Domestic market, you're right, Dr. Antoine, you're right, Dr. Roberts. Yeah? Domestic market is where you start, because I'm telling you, right now in the, Saisha knows this person who had a plantation. It cost them $40,000 in fees to get all the papers and stuff for California. By the time they were reaping and they went to the market flat, done. Because everybody was doing the same. Okay.
I want to thank you very much for your contribution there. I just want to make some comments, some takeaway from the presenters. I think this has been a very good discussion on the economic side of this discourse. And I know Dr. Patrick was not the first, but I love his comment about thinking about this business as a commodity business. And that doesn't take away from the presenters that came before in terms of treating the issue of marijuana from the perspective of decriminalization or legalization. That is a social issue. It has significant cost as it is in our present system. The cost of incarceration, of the economic fallouts of having to jail someone, pull them into courthouse, having someone lose their job because they were found with a spliff. I think all these are issues that needs to be built with. And most importantly, people who have a record, whether it is be for a single spliff or a 5 pound of marijuana, they are marked for life. And that has a cost in terms of how you proceed with your life going forward. The cost implications are from different perspectives. One is there has to be something lucrative about marijuana use, whether it is from a religious standpoint that it gives you some social well-being, or whether it is that it is a trading commodity. What this discussion is all about is what the cost implications to the country is. The cost implication in this country is that we have to jail people who have, quote-unquote, broken the law. And probably in prisons there are many more persons for minor offenses of marijuana possession who we are converting into hardcore criminals. And that is a cost the country is going to bear for a very long time. Now, there are opportunities that, they say every problem has an opportunity because a problem doesn't exist on its own. It's how you want to look at it. Decriminalizing marijuana has its bounds. It's not a open sepulchre. And I'm listening to the discussion, and I'm a little bit more tolerant to the politician walking gingerly into this night, because it has its downsides, it has its upsides, and you have to get this thing right. It's not a question of the taking off all the controls. It's a question as to how you introduce or broaden what I say, the space of freedom. And the quicker we can get to that place, the better it is for every one of us. I don't have to basically dissect the different presentations, but what I would like to say is that this transitioning challenge is not one about being coward. It's a transitioning challenge. In other words, getting from this place to that place. But the road is not in a straight line. The complexities are numerous. As much as we would like to say, many persons want decriminalization, but decriminalization without what I call within a controlled environment. You look at alcohol, for example, and you can ask many wives and girlfriends. They don't mind their husbands or their boyfriends having a drink. But it's the amount that has been consumed and the implication it has for family life. So jumping into that pot with just a banner that says legalize it is more of a fashion, probably a fad, and I just want to concern it. We have to take these things in balanced measures. First of all, we want to have less people being criminalized for marijuana use. So the urgent call is for decriminalization. How we move forward needs other stakeholders' consultation. At some point in time, probably we'll have a deeper discourse as to who the stakeholders are and what it means to them. The stakeholders are not just the people who plant and grow, but the stakeholders are people in the community, and I think Dr. Antoine mentioned it in a way, Dr. Fletcher mentioned it, the whole issue of who controls the financial space and what are they likely to do. And I would like to tell you, in my experience in working in a distillery, a simple issue of buying rum in Grenada and having to change a flight in Barbados, you are likely to lose your rum. So once we think that all is fair and all is bright and everybody should be acting within the same considerations, people protect the space. And it has to be an issue with deep consultation so that we could have a comfortable position. If not, there will be issues where particular section of our small farming society will be marginalized by those who preferably have the financial acumen, they know, they understand the market, and they can operationalize this thing in terms of having our people just being a producer of a primary product and not having any economic or significant economic benefit. So the discourse is to think about this thing carefully. Decriminalization is urgently needed. But how we proceed has to be something deeply thought out. So I thank you very much.